They laughed when she stepped onto the ranch, until she chose the one man no one survived working for. The foreman's grin was all teeth and malice as he pointed toward the figure standing alone in the distant corral. "You want work so bad, girl? You can work for Rafe Calder." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Mara didn't understand why the other workers looked at her with something between pity and horror, but she was too desperate to care. She had $40 left, no family, and nowhere else to go. Stay with me until the end to see how this impossible choice changed everything. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The hiring line stretched across the dirt lot like a scar, 37 people deep when Mara first joined it at dawn. By the time the sun climbed high enough to burn, only 19 remained. The rest had given up or been turned away. Mara stood near the back, her boots held together with duct tape, her hands shoved deep in her jacket pockets to hide the trembling. Not from fear, from hunger. She'd eaten half a gas station sandwich yesterday and nothing since. The ranch spread out behind the hiring station like something out of another century. Endless fields, weathered fences, barns that looked older than the state itself. In the distance, cattle moved in slow clusters. Closer in, men worked in pairs, hauling equipment, repairing gates, moving with the efficient rhythm of people who knew their place in the world. Mara had no place. Not anymore. Next, the foreman's voice cut through her thoughts. He was a thick-shouldered man with a face like sun-dried leather, sitting behind a folding table with a clipboard and a thermos of coffee that smelled like heaven. His name tag read Donovan. The woman ahead of Mara stepped forward, tall, broad, with arms like she'd spent her life swinging hammers. Donovan barely glanced at her paperwork. "You done ranch work before?" 5 years up in Montana. Cattle, horses, fence repair, equipment maintenance. "You start Monday. Report to the main barn at 5:30. Just like that. 10 seconds, and the woman had a job. Mara's throat tightened. She stepped forward before Donovan could call the next person. He looked up and his expression shifted. Not quite a smile. Something meaner. "Well," he said slowly, "what do we have here?" Mara set her single sheet of paper on the table, a resume she'd printed at a library 3 towns back. "I'm here for the ranch hand position." Donovan didn't touch the paper. He leaned back in his chair, looking her up and down with deliberate slowness. Behind him, 2 other ranch workers had stopped what they were doing to watch. "You got ranch experience?" "No, but Farm work? Construction? Heavy equipment?" "No, but I learn fast and I'll work harder than—" "How much you weigh, girl? 100 pounds? 112. One of the workers behind Donovan snorted. The foreman's grin widened. "See, here's the thing," Donovan said, picking up his coffee. "This ain't an office. We don't need someone to answer phones or file papers. We need people who can work. Real work. You understand what I'm saying?" Mara's jaw tightened. "I can work. Can you lift 80 pounds? "I can try." "Try don't feed cattle, sweetheart. Try don't fix a busted fence before the herd gets out." He gestured to the ranch behind him. "This is a working ranch, 12-hour days minimum. No climate control, no breaks when you feel like it. You'll be lifting, hauling, digging, building. Your hands will bleed, your back will scream. And when you think you can't take another step, you'll have 6 more hours to go." "I understand." "Do you?" Donovan set his coffee down and leaned forward. "Because I'm looking at you, and I'm seeing someone who's going to last maybe 3 hours before she's crying to go home." Behind her, someone in line laughed. Mara didn't turn around. "I don't have a home," she said quietly. "I have $40 and this one chance. So either give me a job or tell me no, but stop wasting both our time." The laughter died. Donovan studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then something shifted in his eyes, a spark of cruelty disguised as opportunity. "All right," he said. "You want to work so bad? I'll give you a job." Relief flooded through Mara so fast she felt lightheaded. "But," Donovan continued, standing up, "you don't get to pick your crew. You work where I put you." "That's fine. Even if I put you with Rafe Calder?" The name meant nothing to Mara, but it clearly meant something to everyone else. The 2 workers behind Donovan exchanged glances. Someone in line behind Mara whispered, Jesus Christ, he's really doing it. Donovan pointed across the ranch to a distant corral where a solitary figure stood checking fence posts. Even from this distance, Mara could tell the man was tall, his movements precise and economical. That's Rafe Calder, Donovan said. Best crew boss on this ranch, also the hardest. Works his people like dogs, holds them to standards nobody else can match. Last 3 workers I sent him quit inside a week. The one before that lasted 2 days. Why? Because you don't give second chances, don't accept excuses, and don't suffer fools. You mess up, you fix it. You can't keep up, you're gone. Simple as that. Mara looked at the distant figure, then back at Donovan. And you want to send me to him? I'm giving you exactly what you asked for, a job. What you do with it is up to you. It was a setup, everyone knew it. Donovan was throwing her to the wolves for entertainment, betting she'd fail spectacularly and prove his point about women who didn't know their place. Mara could see it in his eyes, could hear it in the barely suppressed laughter from the workers watching, could feel it in the pitying looks from the people still waiting in line. She had 2 choices: refuse and walk away with nothing, or accept and probably fail anyway. But walking away meant going back to sleeping in her car, to skipping meals, to the endless cycle of rejection that had brought her here in the first place. When do I start? Mara said. Donovan's grin was all teeth. Right now, follow me. He led her across the ranch yard, past clusters of workers who stopped to stare, past equipment sheds and feed storage, toward the distant corral. With every step, Mara felt the weight of their judgment. She won't last till lunch, someone muttered. $20 says she quits before she even meets him. Hell, I'll take that bet. She looks stubborn enough to make it to the first water break. Donovan didn't slow down or acknowledge the comments. He just kept walking, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. Let me give you some free advice, he said without looking back. Rafe don't care about your situation, don't care that you're desperate or trying hard. He cares about results. You do the work right, you stay. You don't, you're done. Simple as that. I understand. No, you don't, but you will. They reached the corral. Up close, Mara could see the fence posts Rafe was inspecting, each one marked with chalk, some circled, some exit out. He worked with complete focus, testing each post for stability, checking for rot or damage, making notes on a worn clipboard. He was taller than she'd thought, maybe 6'3", with the kind of build that came from years of physical labor rather than gym memberships. His face was weathered, angular, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. His hands, wrapped around the fence post he was examining, were scarred and calloused. Calder, Donovan called out. Got you a new worker. Rafe didn't look up. I didn't ask for one. Well, you got one anyway. Ranch owner's orders. We're short-staffed across the board. Then send them to Mitchell's crew. He's down 2 people. Can't. This one's special. Donovan's voice dripped with false sincerity. Eager to learn. Real motivated. Rafe finally looked up, his gaze moving from Donovan to Mara. His expression didn't change. No surprise, no judgment, nothing. Just a flat, assessing stare that made her feel like a piece of equipment being evaluated for usefulness. No, he said, turning back to his fence posts. Excuse me? I said no. I don't have time to babysit. Mara's face burned, but she kept her mouth shut. Donovan's grin widened. Owner says you're taking her, unless you want to argue with him directly. A long silence followed. Rafe set down his clipboard carefully, deliberately, then turned to face them fully. What's your name? He asked Mara. Mara Quinn? You ever worked a ranch before, Mara Quinn? No. Farm, construction, anything physical? No. Why are you here? The question caught her off guard. Not why do you want this job, but why are you here? Like he could see through to the desperation underneath. Because I need work, she said. There's easier work than this. Not that I can get. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. But his expression remained flat. The work starts at 5:30 every morning. You're late. You're fired. You don't show up? You're fired. You can't handle the workload. You're fired. I don't give warnings. I don't give second chances. And I don't adjust my standards for anybody. Clear? Clear. You'll work the same hours as everyone else, do the same jobs as everyone else, meet the same benchmarks as everyone else. You want special treatment because you're new or because you're smaller than the rest of the crew? Go work for somebody else. I don't want special treatment. Good, because you won't get it. He picked up his clipboard again. Be at the equipment shed tomorrow morning at 5:30. Wear boots with actual tread, long pants, long sleeves. Bring work gloves if you have them. Don't bring your phone. Don't bring headphones. Don't bring anything that's going to distract you from work. Okay. That's all. You can go. Mara didn't move. What about the rest of today? Rafe looked at her like she'd asked something incomprehensible. What about it? It's only 10:30. Do I start now or tomorrow? Behind her, Donovan made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. Rafe's eyes narrowed slightly. You want to start now? I'm here. I'm ready. Why waste time? For the first time, something almost like interest crossed Rafe's face. Not approval, just acknowledgement that she'd surprised him. Fine, he said. Grab those work gloves from the shed behind you. Then come back here and start replacing every fence post I've marked with an X. There's new posts stacked by the barn. You'll need the post hole digger from the equipment shed and the tamping bar. Holes need to be exactly 3 feet deep, posts need to be vertical within 2 degrees, and the ground around each post needs to be tamped solid. Any questions? Mara had about 1,000 questions, starting with what a tamping bar was, and how you measured 2 degrees without a level. But Donovan was watching with barely concealed glee, and she could see other workers gathering in the distance to watch the show. No questions, she said. Then get to work. Donovan left, still grinning. Rafe went back to his inspection like Mara had already ceased to exist. She found the work gloves, stiff leather things that were too big for her hands, and located the equipment shed. The post hole digger turned out to be a long tool with 2 handles and scissoring blades designed to scoop out dirt. The tamping bar was a heavy iron rod with a flat bottom for packing soil. Both were heavier than they looked. The new fence posts were stacked beside the barn, each one 8 feet long and pressure-treated. Mara tried lifting one and immediately understood why everyone had been laughing. The thing weighed at least 60 pounds, but there was no one to help her, and Rafe had already made it clear he wasn't interested in excuses. So she wrapped both arms around the post, hoisted it onto her shoulder, and started walking. 60 pounds didn't sound that heavy. Spread across your whole body, you'd barely notice it. Concentrated on one shoulder, carried across uneven ground for 100 yards, it felt like carrying a tree trunk. By the time she reached the first marked post, her shoulder was screaming and her hands were cramping. She lowered the post to the ground, trying not to drop it, then stood there catching her breath. Rafe was still working 50 yards away, his back to her. He hadn't looked up once. Mara grabbed the post hole digger and positioned it next to the old fence post she was supposed to replace. The ground looked solid, hard-packed dirt with scattered rocks. She drove the digger down. It sank maybe 3 inches before hitting resistance. She tried again. Another 2 inches. By the 6th attempt, she'd carved out a hole about 8 inches deep, and her arms felt like rubber. 3 feet, he'd said. 36 inches. She had 28 inches to go. Mara adjusted her grip and kept digging. Each scoop brought up maybe a handful of dirt and small rocks. When she hit larger rocks, she had to work the digger around them, trying to lever them free. Sweat ran down her back, soaked through her shirt. After 20 minutes, she'd made it down 18 inches. After 40 minutes, 24 inches. Her hands started bleeding somewhere around the 1-hour mark. The work gloves were too big, rubbing against her palms with every thrust of the digger. She could feel blisters forming, breaking, forming again. She didn't stop. Finally, she hit 3 feet. The hole was ragged and uneven, nothing like the clean cylindrical holes she'd seen around the other posts, but it was deep enough. Now came the hard part. Removing the old post. Mara grabbed the post with both hands and pulled. It didn't budge. She tried twisting it, rocking it, anything to loosen the packed earth around it. Nothing. You'll need a lever, a voice said behind her. Mara spun around. Rafe stood there, his clipboard under one arm, watching her with that same flat expression. A lever? She asked. Pry bars in the equipment shed. Dig around the base of the old post first, then use the bar to lever it out. Otherwise, you'll be there all day. He didn't offer to show her, didn't demonstrate, just stated the fact and waited to see what she'd do with it. Mara nodded and headed back to the equipment shed, trying not to limp. Her legs had started cramping from all the digging. The pry bar was easy to find, a 5-foot iron rod with a flattened wedge at one end. She carried it back to the post and started digging around the base, using the post hole digger to widen the original hole. 15 minutes later, she had enough clearance to wedge the pry bar under the old post. She set it against a rock for leverage and pushed down. The post shifted, just an inch, but it moved. She repositioned the bar and pushed again. Another inch. Again. Again. On the sixth attempt, the post came free with a sucking sound, toppling sideways and nearly taking Mara with it. She stood there panting, staring at the fallen post like she'd just slain a dragon. Then she looked at the fence line and counted how many X marks Rafe had made. 14. 14 posts to replace. She'd just spent nearly 2 hours on one. The sun was directly overhead now, turning the ranch into an oven. Mara's water bottle was back in her car, which was parked half a mile away at the hiring station. Her mouth felt like sandpaper, but Rafe was still working, moving down the fence line with steady efficiency. He hadn't stopped for water, hadn't taken a break. So neither would she. Mara dragged the new post over to the hole she'd dug and tried to lift it into position. It was awkward, heavy, and kept wanting to tip over. After 3 failed attempts, she finally got it vertical and held it in place with one hand while she started shoveling dirt back into the hole with the other. The dirt didn't want to go where she wanted it to go. It kept sliding down unevenly, leaving gaps. The post leaned left, then right, refusing to stay straight. By the time she'd filled the hole halfway and started tamping, her arms were shaking and the post was tilted at least 10 degrees off vertical. She stopped, pulled out all the dirt, and started over. Same result. Third time, she got it closer, maybe 5 degrees off. Fourth time, the post looked almost straight. Close enough. Except Rafe had said within 2 degrees, and she had no idea if this qualified. She tamped the dirt down as hard as she could until the post felt solid, then stepped back to assess her work. The post stood firm, straight enough to her eye, but the hole around it was a mess. Uneven packed dirt with visible gaps. Nothing like the clean, professional finish on the other posts. Mara looked down the fence line again. 13 posts to go. The sun beat down mercilessly. Her hands throbbed. Her shoulders burned. She picked up the post hole digger and walked to the next X mark. By the time the sun started its descent toward the horizon, Mara had replaced 4 posts, 4 out of 14. Her entire body had progressed beyond pain into a numb, mechanical state where movement was just something that happened, disconnected from conscious thought. Dig, lever, lift, position, fill, tamp, repeat. Her hands weren't just blistered anymore. They were raw, the skin torn away in places, blood mixing with dirt to form a dark paste in her palms. Every time she gripped the post hole digger, fresh pain shot up her arms. She ignored it and kept working. Around 4 o'clock, a truck rolled up and parked nearby. 2 workers got out, the same 2 who'd been watching earlier from behind Donovan's table. They leaned against the truck bed, drinking from water bottles, clearly settling in to watch the show. "Hey," one of them called out. "How's it going over there?" Mara didn't respond. She drove the post hole digger down, scooped out dirt, dumped it aside. "You know you got 10 more to go, right? That's a 2-day job for experienced workers. Drive, scoop, dump. Calder's gonna fire you anyway. Might as well quit now. Save yourself the trouble." The other worker laughed. "Come on, man. Let her figure it out on her own. It's more fun that way." Mara wanted to scream at them, to tell them to either help or leave her alone. But she knew that's what they wanted. A reaction, proof that she was breaking. So she said nothing, just kept digging. The workers eventually got bored and drove away. The sun dropped lower. Mara finished post number 5. Her vision started getting blurry around post number 6. She couldn't tell if it was from exhaustion, dehydration, or both. Her hands had stopped hurting, which was somehow more terrifying than the pain. It meant she'd gone numb. She made it through post number 7 just as the sun touched the horizon. Across the ranch, she could hear the sounds of other crews finishing up for the day. Truck engines starting, voices calling out goodbyes, the general noise of people who'd done a hard day's work and were going home. Rafe was still there, finishing his inspection of another section of fence. He hadn't stopped once, hadn't taken a break that Mara had seen, just worked with the same steady, relentless efficiency he'd maintained all day. Mara started on post number 8. The post hole digger slipped from her hands twice before she managed to complete the hole. Her arms were shaking so badly she could barely hold the tools. When she tried to lift the new post, her legs nearly gave out. But she got it done. Somehow. Post number 8, complete. 6 more to go. The sun had disappeared below the horizon now, leaving only the fading purple light of dusk. Mara could barely see what she was doing anymore. She heard footsteps behind her. "That's enough," Rafe said. Mara didn't turn around. She positioned the post hole digger over the next X mark. "I'm not finished." "I said that's enough. You said I had to replace all the posts with X marks. There are 6 left. And you'll do them tomorrow." "I can finish tonight." "No, you can't. You can barely stand." It was true, but hearing him say it made something hot and angry flare in Mara's chest. "I'll finish tonight," she repeated. "You'll collapse before you finish 2 more posts, then I'll have to waste time hauling you to a hospital. Not worth it." "I won't collapse. You're bleeding through your gloves. You haven't had water in hours, and you're about 3 minutes from heat stroke. Go back to wherever you're staying, clean up, get some sleep. Be back here at 5:30 tomorrow." Mara finally turned to look at him. In the fading light, his face was all shadows and hard angles. "If I leave now, you'll fire me," she said. "Why would I fire you?" "Because I didn't finish the job." "The job isn't done until I say it's done. Right now I'm saying it's done for today." "But tomorrow, 5:30. Don't be late." He walked away before she could argue further, his boots crunching on the gravel path back toward the main buildings. Mara stood there alone in the gathering darkness, surrounded by 8 newly replaced fence posts and 6 still marked with X's, her body screaming and her hands bleeding, trying to process what had just happened. He hadn't fired her. He'd told her to come back tomorrow. That meant what? That she'd passed some kind of test? That she'd done well enough? Or was he just saving the firing for tomorrow morning after he'd had time to document all the ways she'd failed? Mara looked at her hands. Even in the poor light, she could see the damage. Torn skin, dirt caked in the wounds, blood seeping through the leather gloves. She should go to a hospital, probably. Get the wounds cleaned properly, maybe get a tetanus shot. But hospitals cost money, and she had exactly $40. Instead, she stumbled back to the hiring station lot where her car waited. A few other vehicles remained, probably workers who lived on ranch or were staying in the bunkhouses. Mara's car was a 15-year-old sedan with a busted rear window covered in plastic and duct tape. Everything she owned was in there. A duffel bag of clothes, a sleeping bag, a gallon jug of water, and a first aid kit she'd shoplifted from a truck stop 2 states back. She poured water over her hands, hissing at the sting, then used the last of her alcohol wipes to clean the worst of the wounds. The first aid kit had bandages, but not enough to cover all the damage. She did the best she could, wrapping her palms and fingers until her hands looked like clubs, then sat in the driver's seat and stared at nothing. Her entire body hurt. Her shoulders felt like someone had taken a baseball bat to them. Her back was one solid knot of pain. Her legs cramped every time she tried to move. And tomorrow, she had to do it all again. Mara pulled out her phone, 6% battery left, and checked her bank account. $42.16. If she got paid weekly, she could make it. She'd have to sleep in the car, skip meals, maybe find a Planet Fitness with a cheap membership for showers. If she got paid bi-weekly, she'd probably run out of gas money before the first check. And if Rafe fired her tomorrow... Mara closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the seat. She'd figure it out. She always did. Through the cracked window, she could hear the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. Cattle lowing in the distance, the wind rattling through the barn structures, the occasional bark of a dog. Somewhere out there, Rafe Calder was probably having dinner, sleeping in a real bed, not worrying about whether he'd have a job tomorrow. Mara hated him a little bit for that, but she also understood. He'd given her a chance today, more of a chance than Donovan had intended, certainly. He could have fired her after the first hour, could have stood there criticizing every mistake. Instead, he'd worked his own job and let her work hers, only stepping in at the end to keep her from literally killing herself. That was something. Maybe not kindness, but something. Mara set an alarm on her dying phone for 4:30 in the morning, reclined the seat as far as it would go, and pulled the sleeping bag over herself. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Tomorrow at 5:30, she'd be back at that fence line. And the day after that, and the day after that, for as long as Rafe Calder let her stay. The alarm went off at 4:30, dragging Mara from a sleep so deep it felt like drowning. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, only that every part of her body was screaming. Then it all came back. The ranch. The fence posts. Rafe Calder's flat stare and Donovan's cruel grin. She tried to sit up and nearly blacked out from the pain. Her shoulders had locked up completely overnight. Her back felt like someone had replaced her spine with broken glass. And her hands, wrapped in their makeshift bandages, throbbed with a deep, nauseating ache. Mara forced herself upright anyway, breathing through gritted teeth. The car's windows had fogged over during the night, trapping the smell of sweat and blood and the metallic tang of fear. 4:37. Less than an hour to get herself functional and back to that equipment shed. She unwrapped the bandages carefully, hissing as dried blood pulled at the wounds. The blisters had burst and reformed, leaving raw patches across both palms. Her fingers were swollen, the joints stiff. There was no way she could grip a post-hole digger like this. She'd have to find a way anyway. Using the last of her water jug, Mara cleaned the wounds again and rewrapped them with fresh bandages, layering them thick enough to provide some cushioning. Then she pulled on the same dirt-stained clothes from yesterday. She had clean ones in her duffel, but those needed to last, and today was going to destroy whatever she wore. Her stomach growled. She'd eaten nothing since that half sandwich 2 days ago. The glove box held an emergency granola bar, stale and probably expired. Mara ate it in 3 bites, washing it down with the dregs from a water bottle she'd found under the passenger seat. Not enough. Not even close. But it would have to do. At 5:15, she grabbed the work gloves from yesterday, stiff with dried blood, and started the walk back to the equipment shed. The ranch was just beginning to wake up. Lights flickered on in some of the buildings. In the distance, she could hear the low rumble of truck engines starting up. The equipment shed stood dark and silent. Mara was the first one there. She leaned against the wall, trying to conserve energy, watching the sky gradually lighten from black to deep blue. Other workers started arriving around 5:20, men and women in worn jeans and faded shirts, carrying thermoses and lunch coolers, talking in low voices about schedules and assignments. None of them acknowledged Mara. A few glanced her way, then quickly looked away, like she was something embarrassing they didn't want to witness. At exactly 5:29, Rafe's truck pulled up. He climbed out carrying a thermos and a clipboard, his expression as flat and unreadable as yesterday. "Quinn?" he said, not quite looking at her. "You're early. You said 5:30. Early's 5:20. 5:30 is on time. On time is late." He consulted his clipboard. "Today you're finishing those fence posts. Same standards as yesterday. After that you're on water trough duty with Martinez." A stocky man with gray-streaked hair stepped forward. Martinez looked Mara up and down, his expression skeptical but not unkind. "She know anything about livestock?" Martinez asked. "She will by the end of the day," Rafe said. He turned to address the assembled workers, about 15 people total. "Listen up, North Pasture Fence is still a priority. I want it completed by end of week. Daniels, you're on equipment maintenance. Chen, you're with me on the irrigation system repair. Everyone else, you know your assignments. Any questions?" Silence. "Then get to work." The group dispersed. Rafe headed toward his truck without another word to Mara, leaving her standing there with Martinez. "You ever worked cattle before?" Martinez asked. "No." "Horses?" "No." "Any animals bigger than a house cat?" "No." Martinez sighed. "All right. Well, today's going to be educational. Finish your fence work first. Calder don't like people jumping between jobs. Come find me when you're done. I'll be at the South Water Troughs." He walked off, leaving Mara alone. The sun was climbing now, already warm. By noon, it would be brutal. Mara made her way back to the fence line where 6 posts still waited, marked with chalk X's like targets. Her shoulders protested with every step. Her hand screamed when she picked up the post hole digger. She started digging anyway. The first hole took 90 minutes. The second took 2 hours because she hit a root system halfway down and had to hack through it with a hand axe she found in the equipment shed. By the time she finished the third post, the sun was directly overhead and her vision kept blurring. She'd brought water this time, a gallon jug she'd refilled from a spigot near the equipment shed. But it was already half gone and tasted like plastic and rust. Across the ranch, she could see other workers going about their jobs with practiced efficiency. Teams of 2 or 3 working together, calling out instructions, moving in synchronized rhythms that came from months or years of partnership. Mara worked alone. Around 1 o'clock, a truck pulled up and Donovan climbed out. He stood watching her work for a full 5 minutes without saying anything, just observing with his arms crossed and that same cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Finally, he called out, "How many you got done?" Mara didn't stop digging. 9 total. "That's all. Jesus, at this rate you'll finish sometime next week." She ignored him. "You know what I think?" Donovan continued, walking closer. "I think you're trying real hard to prove something. Maybe prove it to yourself, maybe to everyone who said you couldn't do it. But here's the thing. Effort don't mean shit if you can't deliver results." Mara drove the post hole digger down hard, scooping out another load of dirt. "Calder's gonna cut you loose," Donovan said. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And when he does, don't come crying to me about unfair treatment. You wanted this. You begged for it, remember?" He waited for a response. When none came, he laughed and climbed back in his truck. Mara watched him drive away, then went back to digging. Post number 10. Post number 11. Her hands had started bleeding again, seeping through the bandages. Every time she gripped the tools, fresh waves of pain shot up her arms. Her shoulders felt like they were being pulled from their sockets. She kept going. Post number 12. Step in. The sun was starting its descent when Rafe appeared again, materializing out of the heat shimmer like a ghost. "Let me see your hands," he said. Mara straightened up, still gripping the post hole digger. "I'm almost done." "I didn't ask if you were done. I said, let me see your hands." She set down the digger and held out her hands. The bandages were dark with blood and dirt, wrapped so thick they looked like mittens. Rafe stared at them for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he pulled a small first aid kit from his back pocket, the real kind, not a dollar store version, and set it on top of the nearest fence post. "Rewrap them," he said. "Properly this time." "I'm fine." "You're bleeding through to your wrists. That's not fine." "I can finish. I know you can finish. That's not the question. The question is whether you're going to do permanent damage to your hands because you're too stubborn to take 10 minutes and wrap them right." Mara looked at the first aid kit, then at the 2 remaining fence posts. "After I finish." "Now, Quinn." There was no room for argument in his tone. Mara unwrapped the blood-soaked bandages, trying not to wince as they pulled away from the wounds. The damage was worse than yesterday. Deep tears in the skin, some spots rubbed raw down to the muscle. Rafe didn't comment. He just waited while she cleaned the wounds with antiseptic wipes from the kit, applied antibiotic ointment, and wrapped them with proper gauze and medical tape. When she finished, he took the kit back without a word and walked away. Mara stood there, confused and angry in equal measure. Was that concern? Kindness? Or just pragmatism? Making sure his worker didn't cripple herself before the job was done? She didn't know. Couldn't read him at all. Didn't matter. 2 posts left. She picked up the post hole digger and got back to work. Post number 13 went faster. Maybe because the ground was softer here. Maybe because she'd developed some kind of rhythm. Or maybe because her body had simply gone beyond pain into numbness. Post number 14, the last one, should have been a triumph. Instead, it felt anticlimactic. Just another hole, another post, another round of digging and lifting and tamping. When she finally stepped back from the completed fence line, the sun had touched the horizon and turned the sky orange and purple. 14 posts stood in place, straight and solid. Not perfect, not professional, but done. Mara allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to feel proud. Then she grabbed the water jug and headed toward the south water troughs to find Martinez. She found him working with another ranch hand, a younger guy with sun-bleached hair, repairing a pump system that fed into a massive metal trough. The trough was maybe 20 feet long and 6 feet wide, filled with murky water. "You finished the fence?" Martinez asked when he saw her. "Yeah." "All 14 posts?" "Yeah." Martinez exchanged a glance with the other worker. "Huh, didn't think you'd make it." "Most people didn't." "Well, you're here now. You know anything about pumps?" "No." "Course not." Martinez wiped his hands on a rag. "All right, here's the deal. Cattle need clean water. Water sits too long. It gets nasty. Algae, bacteria, worse. So twice a week we drain these troughs, scrub them out, and refill them. It's not complicated, but it's hard work. You listening? Mara nodded. First step is shutting off the pump. Then we open this drain valve here. He pointed to a valve at the bottom of the trough. And let all the water out. Takes about 20 minutes to drain. While it's draining, we're scrubbing the sides and bottom with these brushes. You're going to get wet, you're going to get dirty, and you're going to smell like cow shit because that's what gets in the water. Okay? After it's clean, we close the drain, turn the pump back on, and wait for it to refill. Takes about 40 minutes. Then we move to the next trough. There's 8 troughs total in this section. Mara did the math in her head. 8 troughs, 1 hour each. That was 8 hours of work. And it was already past 6. We're not doing all 8 tonight, Martinez said, reading her expression. We'll do 2, maybe 3. Rest we'll finish tomorrow. The sun-bleached worker, whose name turned out to be Cody, shut off the pump while Martinez opened the drain valve. Water began gushing out, turning the ground around the trough into mud. Grab a brush, Martinez told Mara, pointing to a collection of long-handled scrub brushes. Start on the far end. Work your way back. The brushes were heavy and the bristles were wire, designed to scour away built-up grime. Mara climbed up on the edge of the trough. The sides were slippery, and she almost fell twice, and started scrubbing. The water level dropped slowly, revealing layers of green-brown slime coating the metal. The smell hit her like a physical force, stagnant water mixed with animal waste and rotting vegetation. Mara gagged but kept scrubbing. Cody worked the opposite end, moving with easy confidence, covering twice the area in half the time. Martinez supervised, occasionally pointing out spots they'd missed. Put your back into it, he told Mara. That algae don't come off with gentle scrubbing. She scrubbed harder, her shoulders screaming in protest. The wire bristles scraped against metal with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. After 20 minutes, her section was maybe half clean. Cody had finished his entire end. You're going too slow, Martinez said. Not mean, just matter of fact. At this rate, we'll be here till midnight. Use more pressure, bigger strokes, like this. He demonstrated, his movements efficient and powerful, clearing a section in seconds that had taken Mara minutes. She tried to copy his technique, got a little faster. Not much. By the time the trough was fully drained and scrubbed, another hour had passed. Mara was soaked from the waist down, covered in slime, and smelled like a sewer. That's one, Martinez said. 7 more to go. Well, 6 more tonight if we keep moving. They moved to the second trough, then the third, each one the same routine, drain, scrub, refill. Somewhere during the 4th trough, Mara's body stopped cooperating entirely. Her arms refused to lift the brush. Her legs kept giving out on the slippery metal. She fell into the trough twice, landing in the sludge at the bottom, having to pull herself out while Cody and Martinez watched. Neither of them helped. Neither of them mocked her either. They just waited until she got back up, then went back to work. By the time they finished the 6th trough, it was past 10 o'clock. The ranch was dark except for a few security lights scattered around the property. That's enough for tonight, Martinez said. You did all right, Quinn. Not fast, but thorough. That counts for something. Same time tomorrow? Mara asked. Martinez looked surprised. You're coming back? That's the job, isn't it? Yeah, but... He trailed off, shaking his head. Yeah, same time tomorrow, 5:30 at the equipment shed. Mara walked back to her car, every step an exercise in not collapsing. Her phone was dead. She'd forgotten to charge it, so she had no idea what time it actually was. Didn't matter. She had maybe 6 hours before she had to be back. She stripped off her soaked, filthy clothes in the parking lot, not caring if anyone saw, and used an old towel to wipe off the worst of the grime. Then she climbed into the car wearing just her underwear and a tank top, too exhausted to care about modesty or comfort. Sleep hit her like a hammer. The alarm she'd set on her backup timer, a cheap dollar store thing, went off at 4:30. Day 3, her hands were worse. The rewrapped bandages from yesterday had worked loose during the night, and several wounds had reopened. When she tried to make a fist, her fingers barely moved. She wrapped them again, using the last of the gauze from Rafe's first aid kit. No food this time. Nothing left. Just water from the spigot and the dim hope that maybe she'd get paid at the end of the week. At the equipment shed, more workers showed up than the previous days, maybe 20 total. They gathered in small groups, talking and laughing, sharing coffee from thermoses. Mara stood apart, alone. A woman about her age, early 20s, with dark hair and a braid, glanced over at her a few times, like she wanted to say something but kept thinking better of it. Finally, she walked over. "You're the new one working for Calder, right?" "Yeah. I'm Amy. I'm on Mitchell's crew." She hesitated. "You know people are taking bets on how long you'll last?" "I heard. A current spread is 3 days. Some people think you already quit and just haven't told anyone yet." "I'm still here." "Yeah, I can see that." Amy looked at Mara's bandaged hands. "Jesus. He's really putting you through it, huh?" "It's the job." "It's not, though. I've worked here 2 years and I've never seen Calder push someone this hard right out the gate. Usually he at least eases people in, gives them a few days to acclimate." She lowered her voice. "Everyone knows what Donovan did, setting you up like that. It wasn't right." Mara didn't know what to say to that. Sympathy felt dangerous, like accepting it would crack something open inside her that needed to stay shut. "Thanks," she managed. Amy nodded. "Listen, if you need anything, bandages, food, whatever, you can ask. Not everyone here is an asshole." "I'm okay." "Yeah, you look it." Amy smiled slightly. "Good luck, Quinn." She walked back to her group, leaving Mara alone again. Rafe arrived at 5:28. He barely glanced at the assembled workers before consulting his clipboard. "Quinn, you're with me today. Rest of you know your assignments." The crowd dispersed. Mara followed Rafe to his truck, climbing into the passenger seat when he nodded toward it. They drove in silence across the ranch, past the fence line she'd repaired, past the water trough she'd scrubbed, toward a section of property she hadn't seen before. Fields stretched out in all directions, sectioned off by barbed wire and wooden posts. "Irrigation system's failing in the east section," Rafe said, eyes on the road. "Whole section's drying out because the water's not distributing right. We're going to dig up the line, find the break, and patch it." "Okay." "It's going to be all-day work, probably into the evening. You up for that?" "Yeah." He glanced at her bandaged hands. "Those going to hold up?" "They'll hold up. If they don't, you tell me. I can't have you damaging yourself permanently because you're trying to be tough." "I'm not trying to be tough. I'm trying to work. There's a difference between working hurt and working injured. You understand that?" Mara looked out the window. "Not really." Rafe didn't respond to that. He just kept driving. They reached the east section 20 minutes later, a wide field with visible dry patches where the grass had turned brown. A pipe stuck up from the ground at one end, supposedly feeding the irrigation system. "System's buried about 18 inches down," Rafe explained, climbing out of the truck. "We're going to follow the line until we find where it's broken. Could be anywhere along this section." He handed Mara a shovel from the truck bed. "Start digging where I mark. Narrow trench, just wide enough to expose the pipe." For the next 6 hours, Mara dug. Rafe walked ahead, using some kind of detector to map the buried pipe, marking spots with flags where she should dig. Every 10 feet, another flag, another section to excavate. The work was somehow worse than the fence posts, more repetitive, more monotonous, requiring the same motions over and over until her muscles locked up in permanent cramps. Dig, scoop, dump. Dig, scoop, dump. Rafe worked alongside her, digging his own sections, moving 3 times faster. But he didn't criticize her pace, didn't tell her to hurry up, just worked his sections and let her work hers. Around noon, he tossed her a sandwich from a cooler in his truck. Mara caught it one-handed, staring at it like she'd never seen food before. "Eat," Rafe said. "You're no use to me if you pass out." She wanted to argue, wanted to refuse out of pride. But her stomach was eating itself from the inside out. She ate the sandwich in 4 bites. Ham and cheese on white bread, slightly warm from sitting in the truck. It tasted like heaven. Rafe watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable, then went back to digging. They found the break around 3 in the afternoon, a section where the pipe had cracked, spilling water into the surrounding soil and creating a miniature swamp. "There's your problem," Rafe said, kneeling beside the exposed pipe. "Probably froze last winter, cracked the seal. Been leaking ever since." He pulled out a repair kit from the truck. Pipe cutters, replacement sections, sealant. For the next hour, Mara watched him work with precise, practiced movements, cutting out the damaged section and replacing it with new pipe. "Hand me that wrench," he said at one point. Mara grabbed it, her bandaged hands fumbling, and passed it over. "You know what you're looking at here?" Rafe asked, not looking up from his work. "Broken pipe?" "Yeah, but why'd it break? What's the underlying cause?" Mara studied the pipe, the surrounding soil, the way the water had pooled. "The ground shifted?" "Close. Frost heave. Ground freezes, expands, puts pressure on anything buried. Pipe can't flex, so it cracks. You prevent it by burying lines below the frost line, but whoever installed this system either didn't know that or didn't care. So it'll break again? Probably. Not much we can do about it now except patch it and hope. Proper fix would be ripping out the whole system and reinstalling deeper. That's a $20,000 job the ranch owner won't approve." He tightened the final connection, tested it, then nodded in satisfaction. "That'll hold for now. Let's fill in the trench." Filling in was easier than digging out, just shoveling the dirt back into the hole and tamping it down. But Mara's arms had moved beyond exhaustion into some kind of autopilot state, where they kept moving even though she couldn't feel them anymore. They finished as the sun started setting, the field back to normal except for the slightly disturbed earth marking where they'd worked. Rafe loaded the tools back into the truck. "You did good work today." Mara turned to stare at him. "What?" "I said you did good work. Didn't complain, didn't quit, got the job done. That's all I ask." It was the first compliment he'd given her, the first acknowledgement that she was doing anything right. Something in Mara's chest loosened slightly. "Thank you," she said. Rafe nodded once, then climbed into the truck. They drove back in silence, but it felt different this time. Less hostile, less like he was waiting for her to fail. At the equipment shed, workers were packing up for the day. Donovan stood near the main barn, talking to someone Mara didn't recognize, a man in expensive-looking jeans and a clean shirt, completely out of place on the ranch. "Who's that?" Mara asked. Rafe glanced over. "Warren Mitchell, owns the ranch next door, comes around sometimes trying to poach workers." "Does it work?" "Sometimes. He pays better, easier hours, cleaner work." Rafe climbed out of the truck. "You're done for today. See you tomorrow." Mara watched him walk away, then started toward her car. "Excuse me," a voice called out behind her. She turned. The well-dressed man, Warren Mitchell, was walking toward her with an easy smile. "You're new here, right? Working for Rafe?" "Yeah. How's that going for you?" Mara had learned to recognize trick questions. This was one. "Fine. Really, because you look like you've been through a war." He nodded at her bandaged hands. "That from fence work?" "Among other things." "Let me ask you something. You got any experience in office work, filing, data entry, basic computer skills?" "Some." "I run the ranch next door. We're looking for someone to help with administrative work, scheduling, inventory management, stuff like that. Pays $15 an hour, 40 hours a week, climate-controlled office." He pulled out a business card. "That's more than Rafe's paying you, I'd bet." Mara looked at the card. Clean, professional, embossed lettering. Everything she'd been desperate for a week ago. "Why are you offering this to me?" she asked. Warren shrugged. "Because I'm always looking for good workers, and anyone who can last 3 days with Rafe Calder is someone worth hiring. Also, frankly, because it pisses off Donovan when I poach his people." "I haven't decided if I'm staying yet." "Fair enough. Keep the card. Offer stands whenever you want it." He smiled again. "Think about it. Clean work, regular hours, actual benefits. Beats destroying your body for minimum wage." He walked away, leaving Mara standing there with the business card in her torn, bandaged hands. $15 an hour. 40 hours a week. $600 a week, minus taxes. Enough to rent a room somewhere, buy food, maybe even save a little. Everything she needed. She looked across the ranch toward where Rafe had disappeared into the equipment barn, then down at her hands, wrapped in blood-stained bandages, shaking with exhaustion. 3 days ago, she would have taken Warren's offer without hesitation. Now she wasn't sure why she didn't. Mara slept in her car that night with Warren Mitchell's business card tucked in the sun visor, catching the glare from the security lights every time she shifted position. Clean work, regular hours, actual money. She kept telling herself she'd think about it tomorrow, but her brain wouldn't let it go, turning it over and over like a stone she couldn't put down. By the time her alarm went off at 4:30, she'd maybe slept 2 hours total. Her body felt like it had been run through a wood chipper. The bandages on her hands had soaked through again overnight, and when she unwrapped them, two of the deepest cuts had started showing signs of infection, red, swollen, hot to the touch. She cleaned them as best she could with the remaining alcohol wipes, applied the last of the antibiotic ointment, and wrapped them in strips torn from an old t-shirt. The first aid kit was empty now. She'd have to buy more supplies, which meant spending money she didn't have. Or she could take Warren's offer and never need ranch first aid supplies again. Mara shoved the thought aside and headed to the equipment shed. The sky was just starting to lighten when Rafe's truck pulled up. He stepped out, took one look at Mara's hands, and his jaw tightened. "Those are infected," he said. "They're fine." "They're not fine. You need to see a doctor." "I need to work." "Quinn, I'm here. I'm ready. Just tell me what we're doing today." Her voice came out sharper than she intended, edged with exhaustion and something close to panic. If he sent her away now, if he decided she was too much trouble, too much liability. Rafe studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he walked to his truck, pulled out a proper first aid kit, bigger than the one from before, and set it on the tailgate. "Sit," he said. "I can—" "Sit down, Quinn." Mara sat. Rafe unwrapped the makeshift bandages, his movements careful but impersonal, like he was examining equipment rather than a person. Up close, she could see the scar through his eyebrow more clearly, the lines around his eyes from squinting into too many sunrises. "This one's bad," he said, pointing to a deep gash across her right palm. "Probably needs stitches. It'll heal. Or it'll get worse and you'll lose use of your hand. That what you want?" Mara didn't answer. Rafe pulled out a tube of prescription-strength antibiotic cream, squeezed a generous amount onto each wound, then wrapped her hands with proper medical gauze and waterproof tape. The whole process took maybe 5 minutes, but it felt longer, the silence heavy between them. "You got any money?" he asked finally. The question caught her off guard. "What?" "Money. Do you have any?" "That's not your—" "Answer the question." Mara's throat tightened. $42. Rafe's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. He finished taping the bandage, then reached into his wallet and pulled out 3 20s. "This is an advance on your first paycheck," he said, holding out the bills. "You use it to buy real food and get those hands properly looked at. Not optional." Mara stared at the money like it might bite her. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity. It's an advance. I take it out of your check when you get paid." He pressed the bills into her hand. "You're no use to me if you're half-starved and crippled. Consider it a business investment. I'll pay you back." "I know you will." He packed up the first aid kit. "Today you're on light duty. No digging, no heavy lifting. You're going to help me with inventory in the equipment barn." "I can work regular duty." "I'm sure you can. You're still doing inventory." He climbed into the truck. "Get in." They drove to the main equipment barn, a massive structure that smelled like motor oil and hay. Inside, rows of tools, spare parts, and machinery filled industrial shelving units that stretched from floor to ceiling. "Every piece of equipment needs to be counted and logged," Rafe explained, handing her a clipboard with pre-printed inventory sheets. "I call out the item and location, you mark it down. Simple enough?" "Yeah." For the next 4 hours, they worked through the barn methodically. Rafe would point out items, wrenches, drill bits, replacement parts for machinery Mara had never heard of, and she'd mark them on the sheets. It was boring, monotonous work, but her hands could handle it, and for the first time since arriving at the ranch, she wasn't in active pain. Around 10 o'clock, Rafe stopped and pulled 2 breakfast burritos from a cooler. "Eat," he said, tossing her one. Mara caught it, too hungry to argue. The burrito was still warm, filled with eggs and sausage and cheese. She ate it in 6 bites, barely tasting it. Rafe watched her while eating his own, slower, more controlled. "When's the last time you had a real meal?" "I'm fine." That wasn't the question. Mara looked at the empty burrito wrapper. "Few days ago." "How many days?" "Does it matter?" "Yeah, it does. Can't work if you're running on empty." He pulled out a bag of trail mix and set it on the shelf beside her. "That's yours. Eat it throughout the day." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to. There's a difference." He went back to the inventory. Next section, hydraulic hoses. They worked in silence for another hour. Mara ate the trail mix slowly, making it last, feeling her brain start to function properly again as the food hit her system. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. Rafe glanced at her. "Go ahead. Why'd you give me the advance? The food? You could have just fired me." "Could have. Didn't want to." "Why not?" He was quiet for a moment, running his hand along a shelf of spare parts. "Because you show up. Every day, no matter how beat up you are, you show up and you do the work. That matters." Donovan doesn't think so. Donovan's a bitter asshole who gets off on watching people fail. What he thinks isn't worth the air it takes to say it. Rafe pulled down a box of bolts, checked the label, set it back. "You're doing better than he wants you to know." Something warm uncurled in Mara's chest. Not quite pride, but close. "The other workers still think I'm going to quit," she said. "Let them think whatever they want. You know what you're doing. That's all that matters." They finished the inventory around 2 in the afternoon. Rafe loaded the completed sheets into his truck, then turned to Mara. "You're done for today. Go into town, get your hands looked at, buy yourself some proper work clothes. Tomorrow we're back on regular duty." "What kind of regular duty?" "The kind that'll make today look easy. Get some rest while you can." Mara used 20 of the $60 on a walk-in clinic visit. The nurse who cleaned her wounds tisked disapprovingly but didn't ask too many questions. She applied fresh bandages, gave Mara a prescription for antibiotics that cost another $15, and told her to keep the wounds dry and clean. "What kind of work you doing?" the nurse asked. "Ranch hand." "Honey, these hands aren't going to last a week if you keep doing whatever you're doing. You need to let them heal." "Can't afford to stop working," the nurse sighed. "Then at least wear proper work gloves. And I mean proper. Leather, reinforced palms, the whole deal. Otherwise you're looking at permanent nerve damage." Mara spent another $20 on the gloves at a farm supply store, leaving her with $5 in change. She bought a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a gallon of water, then sat in her car eating peanut butter sandwiches and trying not to think about Warren Mitchell's offer. $15 an hour. 40 hours a week. Climate-controlled office. She pulled out his business card, stared at the embossed lettering. Then she put it back in the sun visor and went to sleep. The alarm went off at 4:30. Day 7. Her hands felt better. Still sore, still bandaged, but the swelling had gone down and the infection seemed to be clearing. The new gloves sat on the passenger seat, stiff and perfect. At the equipment shed, Rafe was already waiting with his clipboard and thermos. He looked at her new gloves and nodded once in approval. "Good. You're going to need those. Today we're moving cattle." Mara had never been near a cow in her life. Cows were things she'd seen from highways, distant shapes in fields. Up close, they were massive, easily 1,000 pounds each, with horns that could split a person open and eyes that showed exactly zero interest in human concerns. "Stay behind them, not in front," Martinez explained. He was leading the cattle operation along with Rafe and 3 other workers. "You get in front of a spooked cow, you're going to get trampled. They see you as an obstacle, not a person." "How do I get them to move?" Mara asked. "Noise, mostly. Yelling, clapping, waving your arms. They don't want to be near you, so they'll move away. Just make sure they're moving in the right direction." The operation was supposed to move 200 head of cattle from the north pasture to the east pasture, a quarter-mile walk through open fields, and across one shallow creek. "Should take about 3 hours, Martinez said. It took 7. The cattle didn't want to move. They'd start walking, then one would stop to graze, and 10 more would follow suit, and suddenly the whole herd had scattered across 50 yards. Mara and the others would have to circle around, shouting and waving, herding them back together. Then they'd reach the creek, and half the cattle would decide they didn't want to cross. They'd balk at the water's edge, mooing in protest, while the workers splashed through trying to encourage them forward. One particularly stubborn cow, a massive bull with scarred horns, planted himself in the middle of the creek and refused to budge. Martinez tried approaching from behind, but the bull swung his head around, forcing Martinez to jump back. "Quinn, you got any ideas?" Martinez called out. Mara stared at the bull. "Me? I don't know anything about cattle." "Neither does the bull. Give it a shot." Mara waded into the creek, the cold water soaking through her boots. The bull watched her approach with dark, uninterested eyes. She clapped her hands. Nothing. Tried yelling. The bull flicked an ear. "Come on," Mara muttered. "Just walk. It's 20 feet. You can do it." The bull exhaled heavily through his nose, spraying mucus. Mara looked around for something to encourage him with. A stick, a rope, anything. Her hand landed on a smooth creek stone about the size of her fist. She threw it. Not at the bull, just near him, close enough to startle. The bull's head jerked up. He snorted, took 2 steps forward, then another, and suddenly he was moving, crossing the rest of the creek and climbing up the far bank. The rest of the herd followed. Martinez let out a whoop. "Hell yeah, Quinn. That's how you do it." Even Rafe cracked something that almost resembled a smile. They got the herd to the east pasture by 2 in the afternoon, everyone soaked and covered in mud. Mara's new gloves were already scuffed and dirty, but they'd protected her hands. The bandages underneath were still clean. "Good work today," Rafe said as they loaded equipment back into the trucks. "You're getting the hang of it." "I threw a rock at a cow. And it worked. That's what matters." "Is every day going to be something I've never done before?" "Probably. That bother you?" Mara thought about it. A week ago, the answer would have been yes. She'd wanted stability, predictability, a job where she knew what to expect. Now, covered in mud and cow shit, exhausted but actually useful, she wasn't sure. "No," she said. "I don't think it does." That night, she slept in her car again, but with a full stomach. She'd bought actual groceries with the last of her advance money. Tomorrow was payday, her first real paycheck in 6 months. The thought should have made her happy. Instead, she felt anxious, like something was about to shift and she couldn't control which direction. Friday morning arrived with dark clouds rolling in from the west. The air felt heavy, electric, like the sky was holding its breath. "Storm's coming," Rafe said at the morning briefing. "Big one. Weather service says it'll hit around noon." "We working through it?" someone asked. "Hell no. When it hits, everyone gets inside. But we got 6 hours to secure everything: equipment, livestock, anything that can blow away or get damaged. Move fast, move smart." The crew scattered to their assignments. Rafe pulled Mara aside. "You're on fence reinforcement, north pasture, where you did the post work. Storm's going to test those repairs. I need you to double-check every post, add support stakes where needed, make sure nothing's going to blow down." "By myself?" "Martinez is finishing the water troughs. Everyone else is on building security. It's you or nobody." He handed her a bag of support stakes and a mallet. "You got this?" Mara looked at the darkening sky, then at the distant fence line. 14 posts she'd installed. 14 posts that might not hold in a storm. If they failed, cattle would get out. If cattle got out, that was on her. "I got it," she said. The wind picked up as she reached the north pasture, whipping her hair around her face and making the grass bow in waves. The fence posts stood where she'd left them, straight and solid-looking, but appearances could lie. Mara started at the first post, testing it with her hands, pushing to see if it rocked. Solid. She moved to the second. Also solid. The third post had some give, not much, maybe a few degrees of wobble, but enough to worry about in high winds. She grabbed a support stake from the bag, positioned it at an angle against the post, and drove it into the ground with the mallet. Each strike sent shock waves up her arms, but the new gloves held. The stake sank deeper with each hit until it was braced firmly against the post. Post 3, secured. She worked her way down the line, testing each post, adding stakes where needed. The sky grew darker. Thunder rumbled in the distance, still far off but getting closer. By the time she reached post 9, the first drops of rain started falling. Fat, heavy drops that hit like pellets. Mara kept working. Test, stake, move on. Post 10, post 11. The rain intensified, turning from drops to sheets. Within minutes, Mara was soaked through, her shirt plastered to her skin, water running into her eyes. Post 12 needed 2 support stakes. It had more wobble than the others, enough that she worried it might snap at ground level. She drove both stakes in at opposing angles, creating a triangle of support. Lightning flashed, close enough that the thunder came almost immediately, a crack that felt like the sky splitting open. Post 13. The ground was turning to mud now, making it harder to drive the stakes in. They'd sink a few inches, then hit resistance and slip sideways. Mara had to reposition them 3-4 times before they'd hold. Her hands ached despite the gloves. Her shoulders screamed. The wind kept trying to rip the mallet from her grip. Post 14, the last one. Mara tested it and felt her stomach drop. This post had the most wobble. She must have rushed it that first day, hadn't tamped the ground solid enough. In a normal wind, it would probably hold. In a storm like this, it needed serious reinforcement. She started driving the first stake in, but the ground was too soft now, too saturated. The stake would sink halfway, then the mud would slide and it would tilt. Lightning flashed again, closer. The thunder was immediate, vibrating through the ground. Mara pulled the stake out and tried a different angle. Same result. She tried packing rocks around the base of the post first, creating a more solid foundation. Better. The stake held when she drove it in. She grabbed a second stake, positioned it on the opposite side, and swung the mallet. The wind gusted hard enough to knock her sideways. She caught herself on the fence post, which wobbled under her weight. "Come on," she muttered through gritted teeth. "Just hold." She drove the second stake in, hitting it harder than necessary, putting everything she had into each swing. The stake sank deep, braced against the post. Third stake, to triangulate the support. The mud was fighting her now, trying to suck the stake down into the soft ground rather than letting it brace at an angle. Mara dug a shallow trench with her hands, creating a channel for the stake to sit in, then drove it home with 6 heavy hits. The post barely wobbled now. Not perfect, but strong enough. It would hold. She stepped back, rain streaming down her face, and looked at the fence line. 14 posts, all reinforced, all ready for the storm. Then the sky opened up completely. The rain became a solid wall of water. Visibility dropped to maybe 10 feet. The wind howled, bending trees almost horizontal. Mara grabbed her bag and started running for the equipment shed, but the mud grabbed at her boots with every step, slowing her down. She could barely see where she was going, could barely hear anything over the roar of wind and rain. Something grabbed her arm. She spun, fist raised, ready to fight. Rafe stood there, his own coat pulled over his head, shouting something she couldn't hear over the storm. He pointed toward a small structure she hadn't noticed before, a storage shed maybe 50 yards away, closer than the equipment barn. She nodded and they ran together, supporting each other when the wind tried to knock them down. They burst through the shed door and Rafe slammed it behind them, cutting off the worst of the noise. Inside was dry and dark, filled with the smell of old hay and motor oil. "What the hell were you doing out there?" Rafe demanded, breathing hard. "I told everyone to get inside an hour ago." "I wasn't finished. The fence could wait." "No, it couldn't if those posts failed and the cattle got out. The cattle would be fine. You wouldn't be." He wiped rain from his face. "You can't risk your life for some fence posts, Quinn." "They're not some fence posts, they're my fence posts. If they failed, that would have been my fault. So what? You'd rather die than admit you made a mistake?" "I didn't make a mistake. I reinforced every single post. They're gonna hold." They stood there glaring at each other, both soaked and breathing hard while the storm raged outside. Finally, Rafe looked away. "You reinforced all 14? "Yeah." "Even in this rain?" "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. Then, so softly she almost didn't hear it, "That was really stupid." "I know." "Could have gotten yourself killed." "I know." "You're impossible to work with, you know that?" Mara cracked a smile despite herself. "Yeah, I've heard that before." The corner of Rafe's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. They waited out the storm in the shed, sitting on bales of hay, not talking much. Outside, the wind howled and rain hammered the metal roof like machine gun fire. After an hour, the storm passed as quickly as it had come. The wind died down, the rain softened to a drizzle, and pale sunlight broke through the clouds. Rafe opened the shed door and surveyed the damage. Tree branches scattered across the ground, small debris everywhere, puddles the size of swimming pools. But in the distance, the north pasture fence line stood intact. All 14 posts still upright, still solid. Rafe looked at Mara, really looked at her, and for the first time since they'd met, his expression was something other than neutral. It was respect. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you dried off." They walked back to the equipment barn together, trudging through mud and standing water. Other workers were emerging from wherever they'd sheltered, assessing damage, calling out to make sure everyone was accounted for. Donovan stood near the main barn with Warren Mitchell, both of them looking out at the ranch. When he spotted Mara and Rafe, his expression soured. "Quinn!" he called out. "What the hell were you doing out in that storm?" "Reinforcing the north fence," Mara said. "I gave specific orders for everyone to get inside." "She was already out there when the storm hit," Rafe interrupted, his voice flat. "And the fence is secure because of it. No cattle got out. No damage to repair. Seems like time well spent." Donovan's jaw clenched. She could have been hurt. But she wasn't. She did her job. Rafe's eyes were hard, which is more than I can say for some people. The insult hung in the air. Warren Mitchell smiled slightly, enjoying the show. Donovan took a step forward. "You got something you want to say to me, Calder?" "Just stating facts. You want to make it something else? That's on you." For a moment, Mara thought Donovan might actually swing. His fists clenched, his face flushed red. Then Warren put a hand on his shoulder. "Easy, Don. Let it go." Donovan shook him off but stepped back. He pointed at Mara. "This isn't over." "Never thought it was," Mara said quietly. He stalked off toward the main barn. Warren lingered a moment, his eyes on Mara. "That offer still stands," he said. "Whenever you're ready." Then he left too, leaving Mara and Rafe alone. "You make an enemy today," Rafe said. "I think I made an enemy the first day." "Fair point." He pulled out his wallet, counted out several bills, and handed them to her. "Your paycheck. 4 days at 12 an hour, minus the 60 I advanced you." Mara counted the money. $324. It was the most money she'd held in 6 months. "I'll see you Monday," Rafe said. "Take the weekend. Rest. You earned it." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing in the mud with a week's pay in her bandaged hands and the knowledge that she'd just survived something she shouldn't have. That night, Mara sat in her car, counting and recounting the money, making plans. She could afford a motel room for the weekend, a real shower, a real bed, maybe even a proper meal at a restaurant. Warren Mitchell's business card caught the light from the sun visor. Clean work, regular hours, 15 an hour, more money, less pain, an actual future. Mara pulled out the card, stared at it for a long moment. Then she ripped it in half and threw it out the window. The motel room cost $48 for 2 nights, but it had hot water and a bed that didn't smell like motor oil. Mara stood under the shower for 20 minutes, watching dirt and blood swirl down the drain, feeling her muscles slowly unknot under the heat. Her hands were healing. The cuts were scabbing over properly now, the swelling almost gone. She could make a fist without wincing. Progress. She ate dinner at a diner across the street, meatloaf and mashed potatoes and green beans that actually tasted like food instead of fuel. The waitress refilled her water 3 times without being asked, and Mara left a $5 tip she could barely afford because she remembered what it was like to depend on other people's generosity. Sunday afternoon, she bought work clothes at a thrift store. 3 pairs of reinforced jeans, 4 long-sleeved shirts, and a jacket thick enough to handle early mornings. Everything was used and worn, but clean and functional. That was all that mattered. By Sunday night, she had $160 left, enough for another week of food and gas, maybe 2 if she was careful. She slept in an actual bed and dreamed of fence posts that wouldn't stay straight. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Mara showed up at the equipment shed at 5:15, her new used clothes still stiff from the store, her hands wrapped in fresh bandages under the work gloves. Other workers were already gathering. She recognized most of them now. Martinez nodded at her in greeting. Amy smiled and gave a small wave. A few others glanced her way with expressions that had shifted from mockery to something closer to cautious acceptance. She'd lasted 2 weeks. That apparently meant something. Rafe pulled up at 5:25 earlier than usual. He looked tired, lines around his eyes deeper than normal, his movements just slightly off their usual precision. "Morning," he said, not quite meeting Mara's eyes. "You rested?" "Yeah. You?" "Well enough." He consulted his clipboard, but Mara noticed his hand was shaking slightly. "Change of plans today. Ranch owner wants the equipment barn reorganized. Full inventory, repair assessment, the works. That's going to be you, me, and Daniels. Everyone else is on regular assignments." Daniels was the older man who handled equipment maintenance, quiet, competent, with hands scarred from decades of machinery work. He nodded at Mara when she approached the barn. "Heard you did good work on those fence posts," he said. Checked them myself after the storm. Solid reinforcement. Thanks. Rafe says you're a quick learner. That true? I try. Trying's half the battle. Rest is showing up. He handed her a socket wrench. Ever worked on small engine repair? No. You're about to learn. They spent the morning deep in the barn's machinery section. Daniel's teaching Mara how to diagnose problems with equipment she'd never seen before. Tractors, post-hole augers, irrigation pumps. He'd point out a sound or a smell or a visual cue, explain what it meant, then have her try to identify the issue on the next machine. Listen, he'd say. Hear that clicking? That's a loose belt. Now look here, see the wear pattern? That tells you which side needs adjustment. Mara absorbed it all like she was dying of thirst and he was offering water. Every piece of information was something she could use, something that made her more valuable, harder to replace. Rafe worked nearby, cataloging parts and supplies, but he was quiet today, more withdrawn than usual. When Daniels went to grab lunch around noon, Mara found herself alone with him in the dim barn. You okay? She asked. Rafe looked up from his clipboard. Yeah, why? You seem off. I'm fine. You sure? Because I said I'm fine, Quinn. His voice was sharp enough to cut. Then he seemed to catch himself, his jaw tightening. Sorry, just got a lot on my mind. Anything I can help with? No. He set down the clipboard and rubbed his face. It's just today's date. It's not a good day. Mara wanted to ask more, but something in his expression told her to leave it alone. So she just nodded and went back to organizing socket wrenches by size. They worked in silence for another hour until Donovan appeared in the barn doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun. Calder, he called out. Need to talk to you. Now. Rafe's shoulders tensed. I'm in the middle of tea. Now, Calder. Rafe set down his tools and walked outside. Mara couldn't hear the conversation from where she stood, but she could see them through the barn door, Donovan gesturing aggressively, Rafe standing perfectly still, his expression locked down tight. The argument lasted maybe 5 minutes. Then Donovan stabbed a finger in Rafe's chest, said something that made Rafe's hands clench into fists, and walked away. Rafe stood there for a long moment, not moving. Then he turned and came back into the barn, his face completely neutral again. Everything all right? Mara asked. Fine. He picked up his clipboard. Let's finish this section. But his hands were shaking worse now, and when he thought Mara wasn't looking, she caught him gripping the edge of a workbench hard enough to turn his knuckles white. They finished the inventory around 4. Daniels had left an hour earlier for another job, so it was just Mara and Rafe loading the completed documentation into his truck. You did good work today, Rafe said, closing the tailgate. Daniels said you picked up the equipment diagnostics faster than most people he's trained. He's a good teacher. Still, not everyone can learn that stuff. Takes a certain kind of mind. He hesitated, like he was about to say something else, then changed his mind. See you tomorrow. Rafe. Tomorrow, Quinn. He drove off before she could finish, leaving Mara standing in the empty lot, wondering what the hell had just happened. The next morning, Rafe wasn't at the equipment shed at 5:25, or 5:30, or 5:45. Martinez checked his watch, frowning. This isn't like him. Calder's never late. Maybe he's sick, someone suggested. Calder doesn't get sick. Man's worked through broken ribs and pneumonia. At 6 o'clock, Donovan showed up with a smug expression that made Mara's skin crawl. All right, listen up, he announced. Calder's taking a personal day. His crew's getting redistributed. Quinn, you're with me today. Mara's stomach dropped. What? You heard me. Grab your gear and get in my truck. I'd rather work with Martinez. I don't give a damn what you'd rather do. Calder's not here, which means I'm assigning his workers. Now move. Mara looked at Martinez, who gave her a sympathetic shrug. No help there. She grabbed her gloves and followed Donovan to his truck, every instinct screaming that this was a setup. They drove to the far west section of the ranch, an area Mara had never worked before. The land here was rougher, more uneven, with scattered rocks and patches of dense brush. Donovan pulled over and pointed to a massive pile of fence posts, easily 50 of them, stacked haphazardly. Storm knocked down the west fence line, he said. All these posts need to be hauled to the fence line and installed, quarter mile that way. He pointed across the rough terrain. Mara looked at the posts, then at the distance, doing the math in her head. 50 posts at 60 pounds each, hauled a quarter-mile over uneven ground, then installed. That was multiple days of work. Maybe a week for a full crew. "How many people are assigned to this?" she asked. Donovan smiled. "Just you." "That's not— What, you can't handle it? Thought you were tough. Thought you could do any job on this ranch." "I can, but this is physically impossible for one person in a reasonable time frame." "Then I guess you better get started, huh? I want all 50 posts moved and installed by end of day Friday. That's 4 days. Should be plenty of time for someone as capable as you." He climbed back in his truck and drove off, leaving Mara alone with 50 fence posts and the certain knowledge that she'd just been set up to fail. She stared at the posts for a long moment, then at the distant fence line, then back at the posts. 50 posts, quarter mile, 4 days. The math was brutal. Even if she could carry one post every 30 minutes, including the walk there and back, that was 25 hours just for transport. Then installation time on top of that. She'd need to work 16-hour days just to have a chance, and Donovan knew it. He was counting on it. This was his move to get rid of her, to prove she couldn't handle the work, to make Rafe look bad for keeping her on. Mara picked up the first post, hoisted it onto her shoulder, and started walking. The terrain was worse than it looked. Rocks turned under her feet, forcing her to constantly adjust her balance. Brush snagged at her clothes and scratched her arms. The post dug into her shoulder with every step, the weight pressing down like a slow-building accusation. "You're not strong enough. You're not fast enough. You're going to fail." She reached the fence line, dropped the post, and walked back empty-handed. 1 down, 49 to go. By noon, she'd moved 6 posts. Her shoulder was raw, her legs were shaking, and she'd fallen twice on the uneven ground. This was impossible. Even working through the night, she'd never finish in time. But quitting wasn't an option. If she quit, Donovan won. If she failed, Donovan won. So she kept walking. Post 7, post 8. Around 2 in the afternoon, a truck pulled up. Mara turned, expecting Donovan coming to gloat, but it was Amy from Mitchell's crew carrying a cooler and a concerned expression. "Heard what Donovan did?" Amy said, climbing out. "That's bullshit, Quinn. Everyone knows it. Doesn't matter, I still have to do it." "Not alone, you don't." Amy opened the cooler, revealing sandwiches and water bottles. "Take a break, eat something, then I'm helping you." "You can't. You'll get in trouble." "Mitchell gave me the afternoon off. Said someone needs to show Donovan that his petty garbage doesn't fly." She grabbed a sandwich. "Besides, I'm off the clock. What I do with my free time is my business." Mara wanted to argue, wanted to refuse out of pride, but she was exhausted and hurting, and the job was impossible alone. "Thank you," she said quietly. They ate quickly, then got to work. Amy was stronger than she looked, hoisting posts with practiced ease. Together they established a rhythm. One person carrying while the other rested, switching off every 2 trips. By the time the sun set, they'd moved 23 posts total. "Same time tomorrow?" Amy asked. "You don't have to." "I know I don't. I want to. Donovan's been pulling this kind of crap for years, and nobody's ever stood up to him long enough to matter. You're different. You're still here." She climbed into her truck. "See you at 6. She drove off, leaving Mara alone in the gathering darkness with 23 posts moved and 27 to go. The next morning, Mara showed up at 5:30 out of habit, even though Rafe still wasn't there. Martinez pulled her aside before Donovan could assign her. "Listen," he said quietly. "Word's getting around about what Donovan's doing. It's not right, Quinn. Whole crew knows it." "Doesn't change what I have to do." "Maybe not, but you should know. You got people watching. You got people who want to see you succeed." He pressed something into her hand. "From Daniels. Said you might need them." Mara looked down. Work gloves, not new, but quality ones, broken in and comfortable, with reinforced palms. "He doesn't even know me," she said. "Doesn't have to. He knows what you're up against." Martinez squeezed her shoulder once, then walked away before she could respond. Amy showed up at 6 as promised. So did Cody, the sun-bleached worker who'd helped with the water troughs. "Heard you could use some muscle," he said with an easy grin. "Got a few hours before my shift." By the end of the second day, they'd moved 41 posts, 9 left. On the third day, Mara showed up to find Martinez already there with 2 other workers from his crew. "We're working fast today," he announced. "Let's get this done." They moved the remaining 9 posts in 3 hours, then started on installation. Martinez and Cody dug holes while Mara and Amy set posts. The other workers tamped and secured. By late afternoon, 30 posts stood installed along the fence line, straight and solid. 20 to go. That's when Donovan's truck pulled up. He climbed out, surveyed the work, and his face went dark red. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. "Fence repair?" Martinez said calmly. "You assigned it." "I assigned Quinn. Not half the damn ranch." "Quinn's working. We're helping. Nothing in the rules says we can't help each other." "This is my crew, Martinez. I decide who works where." Actually, I'm not on your crew. Neither is Cody. We're on our own time." Martinez crossed his arms. "You got a problem with that. Take it up with the ranch owner." Donovan's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. His eyes landed on Mara, standing there with dirt under her nails and a post hole digger in her hands. "You think this proves something?" he said. "You think getting your friends to bail you out makes you capable?" "I think it proves people want to work with me," Mara said, which is more than I can say for some people. The workers behind her laughed. Not loud, but enough. Donovan took a step forward. "You're done here, Quinn. Pack your shit and get off this ranch." "You can't fire her," Martinez said. "Only Calder can fire his crew." "Calder's not here. I'm acting crew boss, which means nothing." A new voice cut through the argument. Everyone turned. Rafe stood there, his truck parked 20 feet away, his expression harder than Mara had ever seen it. "Quinn's my worker," he said, his voice flat and dangerous. "You want to fire her, you go through me first." Donovan's face twisted. "This is my operation, Calder. You don't get to—" "Your operation? You assigned one person to a 4-day job meant for a crew. That's not management, that's sabotage." Rafe walked closer, his eyes locked on Donovan. "And we both know why you did it. Watch yourself, Calder." "Or what? You'll fire me? Go ahead. Try it. See what happens when I walk and take my entire crew with me." He gestured to the workers behind him. "See what happens when Martinez walks, when Daniels walks, when everyone who's sick of your petty power trips decides they'd rather work somewhere else." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Rafe pulled out his phone. "Let's call the ranch owner right now. Let's explain to him why you're about to lose half your workforce over one worker you don't like." Silence. Heavy and absolute. Donovan looked around at the assembled workers, all of them standing with Rafe, all of them waiting to see what he'd do. His hands clenched and unclenched. His breathing was harsh. "This isn't over," he finally said. "Yeah, it is," Rafe replied. "Quinn stays. You leave her alone. Or I walk. And you explain to the owner why his best crew quit." Donovan stood there for another moment, rage radiating off him like heat. Then he turned and climbed into his truck, gunning the engine hard enough to spray gravel as he drove away. The workers erupted into cheers and laughter. Someone clapped Mara on the back hard enough to make her stumble. Martinez was grinning like he'd won the lottery. But Mara was looking at Rafe, who stood apart from the celebration, his expression already settling back into its usual neutral mask. He'd stood up for her. He'd threatened to quit for her. Why? The celebration wound down as people headed back to their regular work. Rafe stayed behind, supervising the final fence post installations with his clipboard and measuring tape, making sure everything was done right. When the last post was secure and the other workers had left, Mara approached him. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For standing up to Donovan. For—" she gestured helplessly. "For all of it." Rafe didn't look at her, just kept checking measurements. "You did the work. I just made sure you got credit for it." "Still, you didn't have to threaten to quit." "Yeah, I did." He finally met her eyes. Donovan's been running this place like his personal kingdom for too long. Someone needed to push back. "Why me, though? Why risk your job for someone you barely know?" Rafe was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "My sister." The words came out rough, like they hurt to say. "She was tough like you, stubborn, wouldn't quit no matter what anyone said." "Was?" His jaw tightened. She died 3 years ago. Today, actually. That's why I wasn't here yesterday. Mara felt something cold settle in her chest. I'm sorry. She was working construction, trying to prove herself in a male-dominated field. Foreman didn't like her, kept giving her impossible jobs, kept pushing her harder and harder. One day he assigned her to work on scaffolding that hadn't been inspected. She fell 30 feet. Rafe's hands clenched around the clipboard. They called it an accident, said she should have checked the equipment herself, like it was her fault for trusting the people in charge. Rafe, when Donovan pulled that stunt with the fence posts, all I could see was my sister. Another person in power trying to break someone just for being there, just for not knowing their place. He looked at Mara directly. I couldn't save her, but I can make damn sure the same thing doesn't happen to you. Mara didn't know what to say. Every response felt inadequate, too small for what he'd just shared. She would have liked you, Rafe continued quietly. Would have respected the hell out of you for lasting this long. I'm not... Mara's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. I'm not as strong as you think I am. Yeah, you are. You just don't see it yet. He tucked the clipboard under his arm. Come on, let's get out of here. They drove back to the equipment shed in silence, but it was different from the uncomfortable silences of the first week. This felt like shared understanding, like two people who'd both lost things recognizing each other across the distance. At the shed, Rafe pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. Second week's pay, he said, plus overtime for the extra hours on the fence project. Mara opened the envelope, $460. More money than she'd ever made in 2 weeks. There's something else, Rafe said. Ranch has some employee housing, nothing fancy, just small cabins for workers who need a place to stay. One just opened up. It's yours if you want it. $100 a month, utilities included, deducted from your paycheck. Mara stared at him. Are you serious? Completely. You've earned it. He paused. Can't have my best worker sleeping in her car, can I? Best worker? You lasted longer than anyone else I've trained. You work harder than half the experienced crew. Yeah, you're my best worker. He almost smiled. Don't let it go to your head. Mara looked down at the money in her hands, then at the ranch stretching out behind Rafe, then back at him. 2 weeks ago, she'd been desperate, homeless, and humiliated. Now she had a job, money in her pocket, people who had her back, and a place to live. I'll take it, she said. Good. You can move in this weekend. Rafe climbed into his truck, then paused. Quinn, you did good today. Not just the work, standing up to Donovan, earning the crew's respect. That matters more than you know. He drove away before she could respond, leaving Mara standing in the fading sunlight with an envelope full of cash and the strange, unfamiliar feeling of belonging somewhere. The cabin was small, one room with a kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower that worked, and a bed that didn't fold out of a car seat. The walls were bare wood. The furniture was basic, but it was clean and dry and hers. Mara moved in on Saturday with her single duffel bag of possessions. It took 15 minutes to unpack everything she owned. Then she stood in the middle of her new home, this tiny cabin on a ranch where 2 weeks ago people had bet on how fast she'd fail, and she let herself cry. Not from sadness, from relief so overwhelming it physically hurt. She'd made it. Against everything and everyone, she'd made it. On Monday morning, she woke up in her cabin, made coffee in her own kitchenette, and walked to work wearing clothes that didn't smell like car exhaust and defeat. At the equipment shed, the other workers greeted her by name. Martinez asked how she liked the cabin. Amy invited her to lunch later. Even Daniels nodded approvingly when he saw her new living situation. Rafe showed up at 5:25 exactly, back to his usual precise timing, and assigned the day's work without fanfare or special attention. But when he handed Mara her assignment sheet, their eyes met for just a moment, and she saw something there that might have been pride. The work was still brutal, her body still ached, her hands still had scars that would probably never fully heal. But she wasn't running anymore, wasn't hiding, wasn't desperately clinging to survival by her fingernails. She was working, she was earning, she was building something. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara Quinn felt like she might actually have a future worth fighting for. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that Mara's body slowly learned to accept. Wake at 4:30, coffee in her own kitchen, work until the sun set. Her hands stopped bleeding. The blisters turned to calluses. Her shoulders learned to carry weight without screaming. She was getting good at this. Actually good. Martinez started asking her opinion on equipment repairs. Daniels let her handle diagnostics on her own. Even the workers who'd initially bet against her now included her in their lunch conversations, their easy banter about nothing and everything. But Rafe stayed distant, professional. He assigned work, supervised jobs, gave instructions in that flat, emotionless tone that told Mara nothing about what he was thinking. The only time she saw anything else was late afternoons when the work was done and most people had left. He'd linger by his truck, staring out at the ranch like he was looking for something he'd lost. Mara wanted to ask if he was okay, wanted to thank him again for the cabin, for standing up to Donovan, for giving her a chance when no one else would. But the distance he maintained felt deliberate, like a boundary she wasn't supposed to cross. So she didn't. Then Warren Mitchell showed up again on a Thursday afternoon, his expensive truck kicking up dust as it pulled into the ranch yard. Mara was helping Amy load supplies when he climbed out, that same easy smile on his face. "Mara Quinn," he called out, and "heard you're still here. Color me impressed." "Still here," Mara confirmed, "and living in employee housing now, from what I hear, moving up in the world." He walked closer, hands in his pockets, completely comfortable in a way that irritated her for reasons she couldn't name. "Listen, I know I offered you that office job before. You turned it down, which I respect, but I've got a different proposition now. I'm not interested in Hear me out. I'm expanding my operation, adding a livestock management division. I need someone to run it, someone who understands the work, who's proven they can handle the physical demands, but who's also smart enough to handle logistics and planning." He pulled out another business card. $20 an hour to start, with a raise after 3 months. Benefits, vacation time, actual career progression. Think about it. Amy whistled low. $20 an hour? That's serious money. "It is," Warren agreed, "and Mara's earned it. She's exactly the kind of worker I want on my team." Mara looked at the business card without taking it. "Why me? You've got plenty of experienced people to choose from." "Because experienced people already have established habits, established expectations. You're hungry, you're adaptable, and you don't quit. That's worth more than 10 years of experience doing things the same way." He set the card on the truck bed beside her. "This isn't charity, and it's not a setup. It's a legitimate offer. You've got till Monday to decide." He left before she could respond, his truck disappearing down the ranch road. Amy picked up the card, examining it. $20 an hour. You could rent an actual apartment, buy a car that doesn't leak oil, save money for the first time in your life. "I know. So why do you look like someone just offered you poison?" Mara couldn't explain it. On paper, Warren's offer was everything she needed. More money, better conditions, actual opportunity for advancement. But something about it felt wrong. Like taking it would mean admitting that what she was doing here didn't matter, that the past month of bleeding and breaking and rebuilding herself had just been a stepping stone to something else. "I need to think about it," she said. That night, Mara sat in her cabin with Warren's business card on the small table, staring at it like it might suddenly reveal the right answer. $20 an hour. $800 a week. More than she'd ever made. She could call her aunt in Denver, the one who told her 2 years ago that she'd never amount to anything, could prove her wrong with an actual career, actual stability, could stop wondering if tomorrow would be the day her body finally gave out. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Rafe stood on the porch, holding 2 beers and looking uncomfortable. "Got a minute?" he asked. Mara stepped aside to let him in. He'd never been in her cabin before, had barely spoken to her outside of work assignments since she'd moved in. He looked around the small space, taking in the bare walls, the minimal furniture, the single photograph she'd tacked up, a picture of herself at 16 before everything fell apart. "Place looks good," he said. "It's not much. It's yours. That's something." He handed her one of the beers and sat at the small table, his eyes landing on Warren's business card. "So he made you another offer." "How'd you know?" "Everyone knows. Warren doesn't exactly keep his recruiting quiet." Rafe took a drink. $20 an hour, right?" "Yeah." "That's good money. Better than I can pay you." Mara sat across from him, turning the beer bottle in her hands. "You think I should take it?" "I think you should do what's best for you." He was quiet for a moment. But I'll be honest, I don't want you to go. The admission hung in the air between them. Why not? Mara asked. Rafe stared at his beer like it held answers. Because you're good at this work, because the crew respects you, because... He trailed off, jaw tightening. Because what? Because I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've trained maybe 50 people in that time. Most of them were competent, some were good, but you're the first one who reminded me why I started doing this in the first place. I don't understand. Rafe looked at her directly, and for the first time since they'd met, his expression was completely open. My sister? Her name was Claire. She was brilliant, tougher than anyone I knew, and everyone in her life told her she couldn't do construction work because she was too small, too female, too whatever. But she loved it anyway, loved building things, solving problems, working with her hands. He paused, collecting himself. When she died, I blamed myself. I'd been her foreman on 3 different jobs, and I'd pushed her hard because I didn't want anyone saying I was going easy on her because she was my sister. I thought I was helping her prove herself. Instead, I just wore her down until she was too tired to notice that the equipment she was trusting was faulty. That wasn't your fault, Mara said quietly. Wasn't it? I knew the foreman was cutting corners. I knew he had it out for her. I could have pulled her from that job, could have made her work somewhere else. But I didn't, because I thought she needed to be tough enough to handle it on her own. His hands clenched around the bottle. After she died, I swore I'd never train another person. Couldn't stomach the idea of being responsible for someone else like that. But you trained me. Yeah, because when I saw you standing there with Donovan setting you up to fail, all I could see was Claire. And I thought, maybe I can't save my sister, but I can make damn sure this one doesn't end up the same way. He met her eyes. You proved me right. You're stronger than Claire ever got the chance to be, because nobody broke you before you could figure out who you were. Mara felt tears prickling at her eyes. I'm not that strong, Rafe. Half the time I'm terrified I'm going to mess up, and you're going to realize I don't belong here. You think I don't see you shaking in the mornings? You think I don't notice when you're working hurt because you're too stubborn to admit you need a break? He shook his head. Being strong isn't about not being scared or not hurting. It's about showing up anyway, and you do that every single day. So do you. Not like you. I show up because it's what I know. You show up because you're building something from nothing. He set down the beer. Warren's offer is good. It's probably the smart choice. But if you take it, you'll always wonder what you could have built here, who you could have become. And if I stay, then you keep building, keep getting stronger, keep proving everyone wrong who ever bet against you. He stood up. But that's got to be your choice, Mara, not mine. He headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. For what it's worth, he said without turning around, I hope you stay. He left before she could respond, the door clicking softly shut behind him. Mara sat alone in her cabin, Warren's business card on one side of the table, Rafe's empty beer bottle on the other, and the weight of her entire future pressing down on her shoulders. On Friday morning, Warren showed up at the ranch just after lunch. Mara was working on irrigation repairs with Martinez when she saw his truck pull up to the main office. You make a decision yet? Martinez asked. Not sure there's a decision to make, Mara said. 20 an hour is 20 an hour. Money ain't everything, Quinn. Easy to say when you're not living paycheck to paycheck. Fair enough. Martinez tightened a pipe connection. Just remember, you can always make more money. Can't always find a place where you belong. Warren emerged from the main office an hour later with the ranch owner, both of them heading toward where Mara was working. Her stomach clenched. Mara, the ranch owner said, a weathered man in his 60s named Robert Chen who rarely left his office. Mr. Mitchell here tells me he's made you an offer. Yes, sir. Good offer, from what I hear. You planning to take it? Everyone within earshot had stopped working to listen. Mara could feel their eyes on her, waiting. I'm still thinking about it, she said. Warren smiled. Take your time. Like I said, offer's good until Monday. Actually, Robert said, before you decide, there's something you should know. Donovan's been let go. Silence. Absolute silence. What? Mara managed. Been a long time coming, Robert continued. Multiple complaints about his management style, evidence of deliberately sabotaging workers, creating a hostile work environment. The fence post incident was the final straw. He looked at Mara directly. You filing a formal complaint gave me the documentation I needed to make it stick. I didn't file a complaint. Rafe did, on your behalf, along with testimony from half the ranch crew. Robert crossed his arms. Donovan's gone as of this morning, which means we need a new crew boss for the general operations team. Warren's smile had disappeared. I'm promoting Rafe to head foreman, Robert said, which means his crew boss position is open. Job pays $18 an hour, comes with responsibility for managing a team of 10 workers, and requires someone who understands the work from the ground up. He paused. Rafe recommended you. Mara's brain stuttered to a halt. He what? Said you're the best worker he's trained in 15 years. Said you've earned the respect of the crew, proven you can handle the physical demands, and shown leadership qualities he rarely sees. Robert pulled out a folded paper from his pocket. This is a formal offer letter. 18 an hour, crew boss position, starting next Monday. You want it? Mara looked at the letter, then at Warren, then at Martinez, who was grinning like an idiot. But I've only been here a month, she said, and you've learned more in that month than most people learn in a year. You've also survived what Donovan specifically designed to break you. That tells me you can handle what this job throws at you. Robert held out the letter. So what do you say? 18 an hour, crew boss, leadership position, $2 less than Warren's offer, but on the ranch, doing the work she'd bled for, with people who'd stood beside her when it mattered. Mara took the letter. I say yes, she said. The crew erupted in cheers. Martinez clapped her on the back hard enough to make her stumble. Amy was whooping from across the yard. Warren's expression had gone carefully neutral. Congratulations, he'd said, but there was an edge to it. 18 an hour is good money. It is, Mara agreed, though 20 is better. Maybe, but some things are worth more than $2 extra. Warren studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough. Can't fault you for loyalty. He shook her hand. Good luck, Mara Quinn. Something tells me you're going to do just fine. He left, and Mara was immediately surrounded by workers congratulating her, asking questions about her new position, making jokes about her being their boss now. Through the crowd, she caught sight of Rafe standing by his truck, watching with that same neutral expression he always wore. But when their eyes met, he nodded once, a small gesture that carried weight. You earned this, it said. You belong here. Mara nodded back. That evening, after everyone else had left, Mara found Rafe in the equipment barn doing end-of-day inventory. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. He didn't look up from his clipboard. Tell you what? That you were recommending me for crew boss, that you filed a complaint against Donovan, any of it. Didn't seem necessary. Rafe, you earned the promotion, Quinn. What I said in the recommendation was just stating facts. Robert made his own decision. Still, you could have warned me. He finally looked at her. If I'd warned you, you would have spent all week worried about it, second-guessing yourself, trying to figure out if you deserved it. This way, you just had to decide if you wanted it. That's manipulative. That's effective. He set down the clipboard. You mad? Mara considered. No, surprised, but not mad. Good. He pulled out a set of keys and tossed them to her. These are yours now. Equipment barn access, office keys, truck assignment. Martinez will show you the scheduling system tomorrow. Daniels will walk you through equipment allocation. You'll have your own crew by Monday. I don't know if I'm ready for this. Nobody's ever ready. You just do it anyway and figure out the rest as you go. He grabbed his jacket. You're going to make mistakes, Quinn. Lots of them. You're going to have days where you question every decision you made. But you'll also have days where everything clicks and you understand why you chose this. How do you know? Because that's what it's like for everyone. The job doesn't get easier. You just get better at doing it. He headed for the door, then stopped. Claire would have liked you, you know, would have respected the hell out of what you built here. I didn't build it alone. No, but you had to choose to build it at all. That was all you. He paused in the doorway. Get some rest. Monday's going to be a long day. He left, and Mara stood alone in the equipment barn with a set of keys in her hand and the certain knowledge that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't fully process yet. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation and panic. Martinez walked her through the scheduling system, showing her how to allocate workers to different jobs, how to account for equipment availability, how to handle the 1,000 small decisions that went into running a crew. Daniels taught her the maintenance logs, the repair priorities, the difference between a job that could wait and one that needed immediate attention. Amy helped her set up her small office, really just a desk in the corner of the equipment barn, and made her promise not to turn into a hard-ass boss like Donovan. "You're one of us," Amy said. "Don't forget that just because you're in charge now." Sunday night, Mara couldn't sleep. She kept running through scenarios in her head, imagining all the ways she could fail, all the mistakes she could make. Finally, around 3 in the morning, she gave up and went for a walk around the ranch. The property was quiet, just the distant sound of cattle and the wind through the trees. She ended up at the north pasture fence line, where 14 posts stood in the moonlight, her first real job on the ranch, the one that had nearly broken her. She tested each post, checking for wobble. All solid. The storm reinforcements had held. Couldn't sleep either? Mara spun around. Rafe stood a few yards away, his hands in his pockets, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "Nervous about tomorrow," she admitted. "Yeah, I figured." He walked over to the fence line, running his hand along one of the posts. "These are good repairs, better than most experienced workers could do." "You made me redo half of them." "Because I knew you could do better, and I was right." He looked at her. "You're going to be a good crew boss, Mara." "How do you know?" "Because you care. About the work, about the people, about doing things right. That's most of what matters. What's the rest?" "Showing up every day even when it's hard. But you already know how to do that." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out over the dark fields. "Can I ask you something?" Mara said. "Go ahead." "Well, why'd you stay? After Claire died, after everything, why'd you keep doing this work?" Rafe was quiet for a long time. "Because the work itself isn't the problem. The work is honest. You put in effort, you get results. It's the people who make it toxic, who use it to hurt others, who turn it into something ugly." He looked at her. "But then I see someone like you, someone who takes that same work and uses it to build themselves into something stronger, and I remember why it matters." "I'm not that special, Rafe." "Yeah, you are. You just don't see it yet." He turned to face her fully. "Listen, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." Mara's heart started beating faster. "Okay. When I first saw you at that hiring line, I thought Donovan was making a mistake. Thought there was no way you'd last, that sending you to me was just him being cruel for entertainment. I didn't want to train you because I didn't want to watch another person fail." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "But then you showed up anyway. Every day. No matter how beat up you were, you showed up and did the work. You proved me wrong in the best possible way. And somewhere along the line, I stopped seeing you as just another worker I was training." "What did you start seeing me as?" Mara asked quietly. "Someone I wanted in my life. Not just as a crew member or a colleague, but as..." E.T. trailed off, looking frustrated. "I'm not good at this. Not good at saying what I mean when it's not about work." "Try anyway." Rafe took a breath. "I want you to stay here, Mara. Not just because you're good at the job, but because I like who I am when you're around. You make me want to be better, to do better, to remember why I started caring about this work in the first place." Mara's throat tightened. "Rafe, I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I'm just telling you that whatever you decide to do, stay here as crew boss, take Warren's offer, move on to something else entirely. I want to be part of your life, if you'll have me." He looked terrified saying it. This man who faced down Donovan without blinking, who worked through storms and injuries without complaint. Mara stepped closer, close enough to see the scars on his hands, the lines around his eyes, the vulnerability he was trying so hard not to show. "You already are part of my life," she said. "Have been since you handed me that first aid kit and told me to wrap my hands properly. That's not what I mean. I know what you mean." She took his hand, feeling the calluses that matched her own. "And yeah, I want that too." "Yeah?" "Yeah." Rafe smiled, really smiled. Not the small twitch of his mouth, but a full, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. Then he kissed her, soft and careful, like he was afraid she might break. Mara kissed him back, this man who'd given her a chance when no one else would. who'd stood up for her, who'd seen her at her absolute worst and decided she was worth fighting for. When they pulled apart, Rafe rested his forehead against hers. "Tomorrow's going to be complicated," he said. "You being crew boss, me being head foreman. People are going to talk." "Let them talk." "Robert might have concerns about fraternization." "Then we'll deal with it." Mara pulled back to look at him. "I didn't survive Donovan's worst just to give up on something good, because it's complicated." Rafe laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "No, I don't suppose you did." They stood there at the fence line as the sky started to lighten, the ranch slowly waking up around them, and Mara felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. Peace, belonging, home. Not because the place was perfect or the work was easy, but because she'd built it herself, earned it with blood and sweat and refusal to quit. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Mara showed up at the equipment barn at 5:15, her hands steady despite her nerves, and found her crew already waiting. 10 workers, most of whom she'd worked alongside over the past month. They looked at her with expressions ranging from curious to skeptical to openly supportive. Martinez grinned and tipped his hat. Amy gave her a thumbs up. Even Cody looked pleased. "Morning," Mara said, her voice carrying across the yard. "I know most of you, and you know me. I'm not going to pretend I know everything about running a crew. I've been here 5 weeks. But I know how to do the work, and I know how to treat people with respect. That's what I'm bringing to this job." She consulted her clipboard, channeling every bit of Rafe's calm efficiency. "Today's assignments. Martinez and Cody, you're on equipment maintenance. Amy and Davis, water trough repairs in the south pasture. Everyone else, we're finishing the west fence line that got started last month. Questions?" Daniels raised his hand. "You going to be working with us or just supervising?" "Both. I'm crew boss, not a spectator." She grabbed work gloves from her pocket. "Let's get to it." The crew moved with practiced efficiency, and Mara fell into the rhythm of it, assigning tasks, checking progress, working alongside them when extra hands were needed. It wasn't perfect. She made mistakes, assigned the wrong equipment to a job, miscalculated how long a repair would take, forgot to account for someone's medical restriction. But she caught the mistakes, fixed them, learned from them. By the end of the day, the west fence line was complete, and her crew had worked smoothly through every assignment. "Not bad, boss," Martinez said as they loaded tools back into the truck. "You might actually be good at this." "Might be," Mara agreed. She found Rafe at the equipment barn, finishing his own end-of-day reports. He looked up when she entered, and something warm passed between them. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Good. Hard, but good." She set down her clipboard. "Made about a dozen mistakes?" "Only a dozen? That's impressive for your first day." "You're not supposed to be happy about mistakes." "I'm happy you made them and kept going anyway. That's what matters." He stood up. "Listen, about what we talked about last night." "Still want that," Mara interrupted, "in case you were wondering." "Yeah?" "Yeah, but we're doing this right. No hiding, no sneaking around. We tell Robert, we make it official, and if he has a problem with it, we deal with it together." Rafe's expression softened. "Okay, we'll talk to him tomorrow." "Good." Mara headed for the door, then paused. "And Rafe, thank you. For everything." "You earned everything you got, Mara. I just made sure you had the chance to prove it." Robert Chen took the news better than expected. He listened to their carefully prepared explanation, asked a few questions about how they'd handle conflicts of interest, then shrugged. "Long as the work gets done and there's no drama, I don't care who's dating who," he said. "You're both adults. Just keep it professional on the clock." "Yes, sir," they said in unison. "Good. Now get back to work." Word spread through the ranch by lunch. Most people just shrugged. Apparently it wasn't that surprising. Amy claimed she'd called it weeks ago. Martinez said he'd known since the storm. Donovan, predictably, had opinions. He showed up at the ranch 3 days later, furious about being fired, demanding to speak to Robert. Mara was working on fence repairs when she heard the shouting from the main office. She set down her tools and walked over, arriving just as Donovan stormed out. He saw her and his face twisted with rage. "This is your fault," he spat. "You and Calder filling Robert's head with lies." "I didn't lie about anything," Mara said calmly. "I told him exactly what happened, what you did. I was doing my job." No, you were sabotaging people because it made you feel powerful. There's a difference. Donovan took a step closer, fists clenched. You think you've won? You think getting me fired changes anything? Rafe appeared from around the building, his expression dangerous. I think you need to leave, Donovan. Now.
Or what? You gonna threaten to quit again? No. I'm gonna call the sheriff and have you removed for trespassing. Your choice. Donovan looked between them, his breath coming hard. For a moment, Mara thought he might actually swing. Then Robert emerged from the office. Donovan, you're not welcome here anymore. Leave, or I'm making that call myself. Donovan held Mara's gaze for one more second, then turned and stalked to his truck. He peeled out of the parking lot fast enough to spray gravel, and Mara watched him disappear down the ranch road. You okay? Rafe asked quietly. Yeah, I'm okay. And she was, because Donovan's anger couldn't touch her anymore. She'd survived his worst, built something stronger than his pettiness, proved that his opinion of her meant exactly nothing. 6 months later, Mara stood in that same spot watching the sunrise paint the ranch in gold and orange. Her crew was already at work. She'd trained them well, and they moved with the efficiency that came from mutual respect and clear communication. Her hands were permanently scarred now, the calluses thick and tough. Her body had adapted to the work, built muscle and stamina she never thought possible. The cabin she lived in had gained personality over the months. Photos on the walls, actual furniture, small touches that made it feel like home. And Rafe was part of that home now. Not living there, they'd agreed to take things slow, but present in the mornings when she made coffee, there in the evenings when work was done, woven into her daily life in ways that felt natural and right. You ready? He asked, walking up behind her. For what? Robert wants to see us in his office. Both of us. Mara's stomach clenched. That sounds ominous. Relax, I think it's good news. They walked to the office together, and Robert was waiting with papers spread across his desk. Come in. Close the door, he said. I've got a proposal for you two. Mara and Rafe exchanged glances. Ranch is expanding, Robert continued, buying the property to the north, doubling our livestock capacity, adding new equipment and infrastructure. It's a big operation, gonna need serious leadership to pull off. He slid papers across the desk. I want you both to run it. Rafe as operations manager, Mara as head of livestock and crew development. Partnership structure, profit sharing, the whole deal. You'd essentially be running half the ranch as your own operation. Mara stared at the papers, not quite believing what she was reading. This is a lot, she managed. It's what you've earned, both of you. Robert leaned back in his chair. Rafe's been the backbone of this ranch for years, and Mara, you've turned your crew into the most efficient team we've got. I'd be a fool not to invest in that. When would this start? Rafe asked. 3 months. Gives you time to train replacements for your current positions and plan the expansion. He tapped the papers. Look it over, talk it through. Let me know by end of week. But I hope you'll say yes. They left the office in a daze, papers in hand, and walked to the equipment barn without speaking. Finally, Rafe said, You want to do this? Do you? I asked first. Mara looked out at the ranch, at the fence lines she'd repaired, the buildings she'd helped maintain, the land she'd bled into. Yeah, she said. I want to do this, even though it's terrifying. Especially because it's terrifying. That's how I know it's worth doing. Rafe smiled and pulled her close. Then let's do it. They signed the papers that Friday. By Monday, word had spread through the entire ranch, and Mara's crew threw an impromptu celebration during lunch break. Speech! Someone called out. Mara climbed onto a truck bed, feeling ridiculous and grateful and terrified all at once. I don't really know what to say, she started. 6 months ago, I showed up here with nothing. No money, no home, no prospects. Most of you thought I'd quit inside a week. Laughter rippled through the group. And honestly, I almost did. Every single day for the first month, I thought about quitting. But I didn't, because people here gave me a reason to stay. Martinez taught me about equipment. Daniels taught me about machinery. Amy stood by me when I needed it most. And Rafe, she looked at him, standing at the edge of the crowd. Rafe gave me a chance when he had every reason not to. She paused, collecting her thoughts.
I'm not going to stand here and say hard work always pays off, or that if you just believe in yourself, everything works out. That's not how life works. Sometimes hard work gets you nowhere. Sometimes believing in yourself isn't enough. The crowd had gone quiet, listening. But what I can say is this: if you show up every day and do the work, if you treat people with respect and let them treat you the same way, if you refuse to let other people's opinions define who you are, then you're building something. Maybe not success, maybe not wealth, but something that matters. Something that's yours. She stepped down from the truck bed, and the crew erupted in applause. That night, Mara and Rafe sat on the porch of her cabin watching the stars come out. "You really think we can do this?" Mara asked. "Run a whole operation?" "Yeah, I do. Even though I'm still learning, even though I make mistakes?" "Everyone makes mistakes, Mara. The question is whether you learn from them." He took her hand. "Besides, you're not doing it alone. We're partners now. In work and everything else." "Everything else, huh? If you'll have me." Mara leaned her head on his shoulder. "Yeah, I'll have you." They sat in comfortable silence, and Mara thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago. Desperate, broken, convinced she was out of chances. That woman wouldn't recognize her now. Wouldn't believe that the homeless girl sleeping in a beat-up sedan could become a ranch manager with a crew of her own, a partnership in a growing operation, and a future that felt solid instead of terrifying. The transformation hadn't been smooth or easy. There'd been pain and blood, and moments where giving up seemed like the only rational choice. But she hadn't given up. She'd chosen, again and again, to keep building. And she'd built something worth having. "Hey, Rafe," she said quietly. "Yeah? Your sister, Claire. You think she'd be proud? Of both of us?" Rafe was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah, I think she would be. I think she'd say we finally figured out what she knew all along." "What's that?" "That strength isn't about never breaking. It's about choosing to rebuild every time you do." Mara closed her eyes, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. She'd been broken. She'd been rebuilt. And she'd become something stronger in the process, not despite the breaking, but because of it. The ranch stretched out before them in the darkness, full of work that needed doing, challenges that would come, problems that would need solving. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. She was ready for it. Whatever came next, she'd face it the same way she'd faced everything else, by showing up, doing the work, and refusing to quit. That had been enough to get her here. It would be enough to carry her forward. And somewhere in the darkness, in the space between the stars and the earth, Mara felt something shift. Not an ending, but a beginning. The start of a life she'd built with her own hands, scarred and calloused and perfect in its imperfection. She was no longer the girl they'd laughed at in the hiring line. She was Mara Quinn, ranch manager, crew boss, partner. And she was exactly where she belonged,